I'm Dan Jones, Creative Director for the White Bear Lake Area High School and Historical Society, same acronym. And you know who that is? That's our friend, Executive Director Sarah Hansen, who will be guiding you on this archaeological dig. She can hear you. So there's no need. So yes, it's creepy. The omnipotent voice coming down from above. But yes, so when we get to Q&A time, feel free to just speak out loudly so everybody here can hear you, but she can hear us. So
in theory, you never know. I can also hear, Dan, that apparently you've gotten a new job while I've been gone. So thanks. Nice way to announce it. No. Anyway, oh, you know what? Okay, let's see. So first of all, I will just start with a quick welcome, everybody. I can hear you, but I cannot see you. So just factor that in as we go. So if you're raising your hand or doing things like that, that's not going to work. That's where Dan comes in really handy because he can see you. But otherwise, we should be good to go. And I am going to actually mute or not mute. Sorry, a little bit slow. It's been a while since I've done this. Get rid of my screen. Dan, does that look okay on the screen?
I just got to get rid of my stuff.
Okay, so you do what you got to do there, and I'll do the introductions and goodies. So as Dan said, for those who may not know me, I am Sarah Hansen, the Executive Director of the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society, and we are trying a new process here. We've done online versions, virtual versions of our programming. We've done lots of in-person versions of our programming. We've never quite done it this way, where we can hybrid quite this way, where I am at home and you are all there. So we'll see how this all goes, but as you probably saw, or many of you have probably heard, I am currently undergoing treatment for breast cancer, which is going extremely well, all things considered, but has its challenges. So hence being at home. But wanted to just kind of put the strangeness of this whole process a little bit to rest for you. And also want to do some acknowledgements quickly before we jump right in. Thank you to the Ramsey County Library System and the state of Minnesota as our partners for this program presentation. The Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment contributes funds or appropriates funds for the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and those funds help to support programs like this. So those of you may recall the constitutional amendment from 2008. That was a 25-year process and is still out there. And of course, our work is always supported by our members at the White Bear Lake Area Historical Society. So we want to thank all of you as well, and those who attend and show interest and be a part of all of this. So tonight, I've been out of commission for a while and haven't done a lot of programs or interpretive work, research, giving presentations and that sort of thing. And so tonight is particularly fun. I did chuckle a little bit when we realized we had this on the calendar, and we have a wonderful team on board at the Historical Society these days, and they can do many, 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 many things. And Dan could have done this in a ramshackle sort of way. And I love you, Dan, but it would have been challenging considering he wasn't actually at this event that we're going to talk about from 2013. And so it really kind of came back to me. And this is one of those events or one of those projects that we worked on that tied together a lot of the things that I love. So for those who may not be familiar with the Johnson Boat Works archaeological dig that we did back in May of 2013, I'll just share a little bit of background. It was a project in partnership. The Historical Society and the city got together to take advantage of literally a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity when the land where the Johnson Boat Works was, and you can kind of see this is where the apartment complex is now. But the land where the Johnson Boat Works was developed eventually, and this opportunity got all kind of in the works for a variety of reasons. Sorry, I'm babbling a little, but ultimately we were able to bring a team of archaeologists, historians, and even a retired state park naturalist to town to do a public archaeology event. Many of you probably know me as a historian who dives deeply into research and records, photographs, and oftentimes buildings themselves. And you're going to see pretty much all of that as we go today. We love to do that with the Phil Brown House, the Whitebear Town Hall, the Armory, and see what the physical pieces can actually tell us about our past. This type of project, an archaeological project, in some ways is very different from that, and certainly not one that we get to do very often in a developed area like Whitebear. Interestingly, a number of the consultants that we were able to pull in for this project are people who I worked with as grad school advisors and intern supervisors and things when I worked on my master's degree at Mille Lacs Catheo State Park. And so I got the archaeology bug back in the 1990s and didn't expect to be able to bring it to Whitebear. But we did. And so that was fantastic. So essentially what we wanted to learn, well, we wanted to confirm, we know a lot about the boatworks, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But what we really wanted to learn and confirm was what we think was true. What are we going to find? What's out here? And so over a chilly weekend in May of 2013, more than 60 volunteers had the opportunity to participate in this. So that was the other piece, that it was a very public event, and you'll see that as we go on the western shore of the lake, and people were able to be archaeologists for a day, if for lack of a better term. But we know quite a bit about the Johnson Boatworks history, or the Johnson history, thanks to many of our sailors and folks who keep that history alive. But this is one of my favorite pictures. It's an early photo of John O. Johnson on the left here, with Gus Amundsen on the right, and then Walter Dupee in the middle, who was obviously the trophy winner, the award winner. But I love the fact that this photo, it's one of the few that we have anyway, that show John and Gus together. And their history is really intertwined. And so I just want to share a little bit about that. In 1893, John O. Johnson came from Norway to Whitebear as a young man, fascinated with boats. He connected with Gus Amundsen, as I mentioned, who you see there, the founder of Amundsen Boatworks on the west shore of the lake. And Gus had set up his shop just across the railroad tracks. And John did basically the same thing. He bought a house over there, set up shop in his garage, and got to work. He was working for Gus for a few years, getting his feet wet, if you will. And then ultimately by 1896, it struck out on his own in the late 1890s. And for more than a century, boats were being made on the shore of the lake. In the fall of 1912, John O. Johnson purchased the site of what would become the Johnson Boatworks for approximately $1,000. He quickly set up constructing a building that was 55 feet wide and 100 feet deep. And this original portion of the boatworks, which you see here, was constructed on the foundation of a saloon that had burned down. Now, this is where Sarah gets excited. The building included a machine shop, an office area in the front, and a larger room in the back for building boats. That second floor upstairs, those windows upstairs, were an apartment for the family. So very much like living downtown above your store or whatever. That was how they did it. And as most of you probably know, over the decades, several additions were made to the building and to the property. And you can see here, this is that original portion. And then you can see different additions as things went on. There's actually, this photo is roughly 1932. And so it even got bigger after that. And we'll see that as we continue on through the program. But so for the most part, our interest in the dig itself wasn't exactly about the boatworks. We knew a lot about the boatworks, or we thought we knew a lot about the boatworks, and we did, and we got some things confirmed, and I'll show you a few of those items as we go as well. But what's more intriguing was that this area, that whole area, I can go backwards here, this whole area from here, which is essentially where the VFW fishing pier is today, and the VFW all the way down beyond the photograph here to where the Whitebear Shopping Center is, and Kowalski's and all of that, where the William Lipe Hotel was. This was all a huge part of our resort community prior to 1900, really from 1870 to about 1910. And so that predates, it was really an opportunity for Johnson to come in after the resorts, the heyday of the resorts anyway, and be able to build right here. And of course, his interest in building. It's a little bit hard to make out, but you can see there at this point there is a road coming behind the building to the west of the building where the highway goes today. But early on, you can see railroad tracks all through here. And again, a little bit tough to make out, but that is what you're seeing. That was huge, both for the resorts, because they could come through and put together, bring people out from St. Paul. It was a 20-minute train ride for the express trains to St. Paul, and they laid on extra trains every day, just about in the summer, every weekend day for sure, and a lot of other special days. And so the train itself actually showed up outside of Vermely's here. We'll see it in just a moment. And this photo is taken from roughly in front of the boatworks, looking north toward the Vermely Pavilion, which would have sat where the Veterans Fishing Pier is today by the VFW. You can see it from the train side, or the other side of the street, if you will. And then as you continue on down toward Kowalski's, you'll see the Leap or Lipe Hotel. This is the White Bear Shopping Center area. And again, quite large, quite a space. And that wouldn't have necessarily been there without the railroad making its way. And then you see the Johnson Boat Works set essentially right in the middle. And this is what it looked like almost entirely by the time it was demolished. So you can see the Quonset hut for storage over here, and all of the extra boat storage, the loft building, the fiberglass building over on the side here, and of course, all of the additional storage space and the extension here for the shop and all of the things that they needed to run a boatworks. This original piece, actually more half of it, if you will, was the original part that they started with, and where my intrigue comes from. The Lakeshore Depot was the first stop at the lake, and so as I said, the railroad was a big part of why these things developed the way they did. And so you can actually see the train station or depot here right in front of the Vermely Pavilion, so just a block or two away, and off they went to enjoy time at the lake. So before we get to what was buried under the ground, the work had to start in earnest long before we got to that part. And so here, for example, you see a photo of the Quonset hut, as they called it. It's a storage building that John O. Johnson picked up post-World War II for additional storage, because they needed lots of storage, as you can imagine. As many people know, there was a lot of back and forth with the project as a whole, and whether or not it took years to get this all processed and done. And it's hard to believe it's been over a decade since the Boatworks Commons was built, but it took a long time to get there. For us, as preservationists, we are also realists at the Historical Society, and while it breaks our heart that some of these pieces of our history are gone, we jump into high gear to document them. That's our key at that point. And so again, taking photographs of the Quonset hut, taking photographs of the loft, both inside and out, all of the buildings, both inside and out. But that was something we were able to do beforehand. And then we were also able to gather some artifacts and things to be able to share. And this is one of my, Dan can attest to my goofiness when it comes to certain visions of things. And this is one I'm sure that he just loves, and he has no idea what's going to happen with it in the future, but it will come back to haunt all of us, I'm sure. This is actually the fiberglass bay at the boatworks. And so in the later years of boat building, like I said, they were there for over a century building boats on the shore of White Bear Lake. And in the later years, fiberglass was all the rage. And so either you fiberglassed your old boat, your old wooden boat, or you fiberglassed, you made your new boat. People were converting things, and they were wooden boats just had gone by the wayside, unfortunately. And so the last wooden boat at Johnson Boat Works was constructed, I believe, in 1976. And so there were many years where they were doing other things and trying different routes. This little microcosm of the boatworks industry and the evolution of boat building in White Bear is something that I got the crazy idea that we should disassemble and store and keep, so that when someday we have a wonderful history center, we want to tell the story of boat building, maybe we put Goose Roost back up, which is what the nickname of this little corner, or my padded cell, which is probably not appropriate, but yeah, also interesting that they personalized many of these things. What I find fascinating about this, in addition to the way it illustrates the actual evolution of boat building, is that on the walls inside, these are tough to see, and maybe you can see a little better on the bigger screen, but on the walls inside, they were jotting all sorts of things. They were putting together information about who, I hope these were not the employment records for the boatworks, but putting together information about, who was here when, who started when, who left when, what they were getting paid, what the, vacation days they took, all those sorts of things in some parts. Other parts were actually weather statistics. So they had, big snowstorms recorded. They had ice out dates recorded. They had, I know Jan Holtz is in the audience, and, I'm sure you've seen that over the years with the ice out stuff in the past, but they're captured on these walls and these panels. And so those are now in our collection storage, and we are able to have them for perpetuity, which is kind of fun. Another thing that we were able to get, if you will, from the site is these bins, these large wooden drawers, and a couple of the smaller ones, some of the smaller ones. This is the shop, the machine shop at the front of the boatworks. And this is sort of the purview of Buster Johnson, as I understand it, one of the three sons of John O. Johnson, who ended up taking over the business as time went on. And so Buster was, they all had their own specialties, if you will. And so Buster would, manufacture and fabricate all of these different parts, the different cleats and things that were needed for the boats to be made or to repair. And so we're able to come in and get these bins again, to be able to sort of recreate something where we could show the evolution of that process and how things come together. So you can see again what they look like there. And so these are actually in storage at our collection storage and entered into our database. And so we know that we've got, I think there are 11 of them altogether to put together to help tell the story of the Johnson Boatworks and preserve that history. So again, even before we got even close to, in fact, even before the buildings were gone, we were able to do what would essentially often be referred to as urban archaeology, and be able to go and sort of capture things above ground. So then, of course, there's the demolition, and you can see this is the beginning part of that process as they go. This took place in February of 2013. You can see as they make their progress down, the fiberglass building would be down here, the other storage buildings down this way in the loft. And the site was cleared. So it was a complicated process, as you can imagine, to get the city to agree to doing a public event in an active construction zone. I'm still amazed that we did it. And I will say that several people in the city lots of folks in the city leadership were very supportive of the idea. It just comes with lots of hazards, as you can imagine, but it was definitely an interesting piece. So it took from mid-February to mid-May, 3 months. We had to go through a lengthy process of securing the approvals and the support, getting contracts done with trefoil, cultural, and environmental consultants who were able to put together the staff of experts to come on site. And then, of course, get the word out and invite people to be a part of it, so that we would actually have the public involved over this week in the middle of May in 2013. So it was nice and chilly. It was interesting. It truly, you can see this big chunk of cement, and I always laughed. Of course, the boulders are there to keep people from going off the edge there, but just nothing about it was probably the safest. But it was done with waivers and all sorts of information, and we had a very short window to make it work. So we did. You can see the public out here. One of the things that I love was that it did rain. May, of course, can be a very wet month, as we all know. And it did rain off and on throughout that week, but it really didn't impede us much. There was a little bit of mud involved, but for the most part, we were able to manage and get through it. As you can imagine, everybody, like I said, had to sign waivers and adhere to the safety precautions. And the be aware at all times, because there was they were pounding the whole time over on the lake shore to put in the footings for the boat, the boardwalk and all of that. And so it got quite interesting, but you can see here the digging has actually begun in some of the areas, and you can see rain had come. So there was mud, but not necessarily on us at the time, so that helps. And people got to get their hands dirty. They got to get down in there and truly take part in the process, which was part of what really made it exciting to me. The gentleman here with the measuring tape is Jim Cummings. He was actually my internship supervisor at Mille Lacs Catheo State Park in the summer of 1996. He's a retired state park naturalist and taught me an awful lot about wandering the trails of central Minnesota and learning the plants and all sorts of things. And so it was fun to see him in a more urban setting, if you will, and put him to work down here. He was retired at this point, and always enjoyed archaeology and enjoyed being able to come back out and do some of those things. Again, Jim, he was a teacher by nature, not by profession, but certainly as a naturalist, that involves a lot of teaching. And so he's constantly explaining things. And here you can see they're actually staking out a grid and starting to do some shovel testing and see what's what, and where might be a good spot to start digging. Because as you can imagine, archaeology in general is a gamble. It's a roll of the dice on where you dig and where you don't, and you can't just dig everything up. And we had, again, a very tight window of time to be able to actually do this. So it was an interesting process. It was far from ideal. There had already been clearly machinery going back and forth during the demolition and taking things out of here. And so the earth was disturbed in many ways, at least on the top layers already. And so we didn't know what to expect. It's a process, and you just never know what you're going to get. But it was a true archaeological process in the sense of digging those grids and pulling dirt and literally shoveling it into the screens. You can see the screens up here that the volunteers are holding and shaking to sift through. The gentleman here is Bob Burgess. He was the director of the Brown County Historical Society down in New Ulm for many, many years. He's also retired now. He wasn't then. He took some vacation time to actually do this. And so it tells you how interesting and unusual this process was in the city. They go through and do lots of projects further out, but not so much within the Twin Cities metro area. So it was kind of neat from that standpoint. It's a very laborious process. It's physical, and certainly people get to do the screen, like I say, shaking and sifting those. I can't show you the motion exactly, but certainly it's exactly what you'd expect, pushing it forward and shaking back and forth like a flour sifter or something. And whoever gets to do the shovel and pull the dirt is doing exactly that. They are shoveling pieces of dirt to see what they can find. It's a lot of dirt and not always a lot of excitement. Quite honestly, lots of dirt and a few possible items. As people work through the screens, you never know what you're going to find, and there's always those moments. One of the less monotonous moments of the event was when Channel 5 showed up with a reporter, and I always have to laugh at this photo because it's Ellen Gallus, who was the reporter at the time, and I don't think she knew what she was getting into. If you look at the footwear and the attire, she's certainly dressed to do a report on TV, but not dressed to be at the site. So as you can tell, we had to sort of stand on the edge and talk about some of the things we were finding. But when we go through and we do find something interesting, it is exciting and can get us all really kind of fascinated. What you see here is the group, the crew. So Jim, this is actually Dr. Richard Rothus, who is my grad school advisor, and who talked me into spending the summer up at Catheo, which is a whole nother story someday if you ever catch me. But Dr. Rothus was the lead of the team. He was the principal at Trefoil at the time. And what you see them doing is actually bagging and tagging the artifacts. And so in the field, it's a fast and furious process. If you find something that's of interest, you bag it, you tag it, you got to record, who found it, where they found it, what pit it came out of or what grid it came out of, and try to capture that. And you can see down here in these, I want to call them pans, that's not quite right, but these trays, that there are a number of bags. Dan has some of those on site at the library there and can show you kind of, it's not a pretty process. It's not a fancy process. It's literally Sharpies and Ziploc bags at this stage. And that's exactly what they were doing. And then we go through and try to figure out what we know about these things. So as you can imagine, at a working boatworks site, you find all sorts of things, and it's an interesting piece. So there's lots of metal, lots of glass. You can see pieces of bottles, machined pieces over here, a fork, not nothing super shocking or exciting. Maybe some pottery. But what is interesting is a couple of things, and I'll point this one out a little bit. Actually, that's just a broken piece of glass. There's some that are burned pieces of glass that have melted and they're misshapen, that came out of there. And we'll talk about why that was particularly exciting to me as we go. But when we talk about the boatworks, as I said, we knew a lot about the boat building business. We know a lot about the boatworks site and the boatworks itself. Thankfully, the boatworks, the Johnson family kept a lot of things. John W. Johnson, the grandson of John O. Johnson, the founder, is a family historian and has done an amazing job researching and documenting this story, and it actually put together a book From Norway to White Bear Lake, talking about John O. Johnson and how he got here and all of the pieces. So that part is not an unknown by any means. But what's interesting is that we absolutely confirmed those things. We were able to, it was definitely a working site. It was definitely a site where metal was fabricated and where boats were built. You know, there's no doubt, I mean, we knew that, but we have physical confirmation of that at this point for sure. But what was particularly intriguing is what came before the boatworks on this particular property. And this is where it gets kind of fun. So, oops, let's go back real quick. So if you look at this specific spot, this is actually a hotel / lunchroom kind of space, hotel restaurant sort of space that it was our understanding that it occupied this site prior to the boatworks. You'll notice several things on this particular map. This map, I believe, is a 1908 or an 1896. Dan, you're the map guy, so if you have any recollection, pipe up specifically, but either, whoop. All right, and so what you'll notice on this map, what I was trying to say before, is what you'll notice on this map is that there are different road names, different street names, excuse me, and streets that no longer exist, frankly. So when you look at this orientation, you see Merrimack Street, which is no longer here, but it's roughly in line with Hinckley Avenue, just to give you a sense of that. South Avenue, of course, is also no longer here. This would be Whitaker today, what we know as Whitaker. And then Getty Avenue, running along here, is no longer there either. It actually is, of course, the Lake Avenue is a little bit closer to the lake shore, but things were shifted around. So as you look at some of these buildings, we were most interested in where these were and what is out here. There are a few different spots, such as this one, and a few different structures showing up. These are all wood structures that were built at the time. And you can see down, this is where the shopping center is between Goose and White Bear Lakes, that you can see the Lipe Hotel and all of its complex. We've got the water pavilion and bathhouse and the large hotel and all of that showing. So maps like this, of course, are fascinating in general. But for our purposes, the boatworks area was particularly in this vicinity. And so there are a few different properties, a few different buildings that are possibly, that could possibly be that hotel that we were looking for, or that we were under the oral history had told us that the boatworks was built upon. So if you look at a modern map again, Hinckley Street comes across here. And if you go roughly in line, it's just slightly to the south is where Merrimack was before. But to give you an orientation on that, you can see the green space that is part of the Boatworks Commons apartment complex now, and the Boatworks community room and all of that. So just to give you kind of a sense of what we're looking at today compared to back then. So, all right. And then we have the hand-drawn map of John W. Johnson, who again was a grandson of John O. Johnson, and has put together all kinds of information and research. And so this is a little bit it's not well, knowing John, it probably is to scale, but maybe not quite. Ramaley Avenue is of course Highway 96, and today's Highway 96, and Lake Avenue is Lake Avenue, and continues on as South Lake Avenue down this way. Merrimack you see here again, and the idea was that the Saloon Hotel was somewhere in that corner or vicinity in the 1880s, 1890s, and so we were very intrigued by all of that. So in playing with all of this in 2013, we were running around and trying to figure things out. And when you look at the site itself, you'll remember these boulders and concrete cap here that I was so interested in, or you could drive off into nowhere. This is very intriguing. The stone wall foundation is very intriguing down below the ground level. And of course, something that we all get excited about as historians. And then, well, I guess we'll look at this still. The other piece of it is that the story, as it had been told, was that sometime around 1903, and we aren't sure exactly when, but sometime in the early 1900s, there was a fire in this particular saloon and hotel, and the building burned to the ground. It was basically during a time when there were a lot of fires in White Bear, and there was the resort era was dwindling. So there were people not rebuilding essentially. So if you had something that was in the hospitality industry and you wanted to sort of move on, you just let it burn, or you just moved on. You didn't necessarily try to start over again, which was not uncommon at the time. Also not uncommon at the time when something like that happened. You didn't have the EPA or the PCA, the pollution control agencies, or the environmental organizations out there monitoring these things. And so more often than not, these places were just plowed over. The demolished structures were just plowed over, flattened, and then concrete or whatever was poured over the top, and they were built upon. So as horrible as that is for the environment, it's sort of fascinating to somebody like me who wants to know what's underneath there. So we were able to talk the city into allowing us to pull that concrete cap off, and we were lucky enough to have the construction crews on site for all of the other work, and so they were willing to be a part of this and pull that cap back for us. And it was essentially like a time capsule. There were a number of things. Well, there were a lot of things in there, some interesting, some not, but you can see that the crew is now going back through and sifting through what they could find in the new space, if you will. And remember that when John O. Johnson built here, it was 1912, and the fall of 1912, possibly the spring of 1913. We've never been able to confirm the actual building time, but it was about a decade after he had, after the potential fire, or somewhere in that realm. So it wasn't immediate, but it was fairly, I mean, depending on when the fire actually happened, fairly soon. It also, interestingly enough, they were able to come in and like I say, put over the top of it. They didn't, there just was no cleanup. I'm always fascinated by that, and again, struck by the fortune that we have in that sense. But so when Johnson purchased it in October of 1912, he purchased it for $1,000, which is roughly about a little over $3,000, or I'm sorry, $31,000 today. Still a steal for that property, but of course it was considered to be industrial, commercial kind of property at that time. And he used that basement that was still there as the foundation to build the 55 by 100-foot boat building for his boatworks. And then the floor was essentially, like I say, like a time capsule. So the crew started going through and working somewhat feverishly. There was a definite excitement through the crowd because we had found lots of things prior to that, but not as much, nothing that really was shocking, not shocking, but nothing that was really unique or unusual. So once we started getting into this round of dirt, we started to find some things that you wouldn't necessarily expect at a boatworks building, such as china. Lots of shards of china and pottery. And you can see here lots of different patterns, many, many different patterns throughout. And that would be very common in a hotel. That would be very common in a lunchroom or that sort of thing on the site. You would also see, we also found decorative items. So you can see some of the glass and things like I mentioned before, lamp shades or lamp globes that would fit the time period, different things that would have, I think Dan has a handle or something that he can show from some of the items we brought along as well, but some of those types of things. We found lots and lots and lots of bottles, and a few of you have mentioned this as people were coming in, I know, and finding bottles in different places. Bottles are fascinating. They're in huge volume because they're around. But what's interesting about them is bottles can typically be defined. And Dan, if you have that Gordon's gin bottle, I can talk about that. It's not in the picture, but I can talk about that a little bit. That's kind of an interesting piece. If you want to hold it up for folks to take a peek, it's a Gordon's gin bottle. It is what's interesting about it is based on the shape and the size and the type of glass and whatnot. We've been able to determine that it was definitely pre-prohibition, so pre-1919. At that point, all Gordon's gin would have come from England. It would have all been imported. It was not made in the US until after Prohibition, after 1934. So that's interesting. And the shape of the bottle, that bottle that we have actually was introduced in 1904. So we have from 1904 to 1919. We're narrowing down the time period. And the fact that it's a cork style, the color and the small bubbles that are in the glass, so talking about the fabrication of the glass or the manufacture of the glass, would suggest that it dates somewhere in the 1910s. So it just gives you kind of an idea of what we're looking at from these sort of things. So that would have come more than likely after the boatworks had been built there. I guess not surprising, folks after a long day at work decide to bring out the gin bottle. But you never know. And so just some of the things that you can kind of decipher from some of the clues that these physical elements give us. Another piece that is interesting is this bottle right here. It has sort of a octagonal shape to it. It's stamped on the bottom Heinz, I think it's H.J. Heinz company. This is the ketchup company, Heinz ketchup. It's probably a pickle relish or some sort of relish jar or bottle, and dates based on its shape and size to the 1930s. So again, a little bit later time period, not necessarily from the era of the hotel piece, but certainly from the era of the boatworks time. Those items actually came from outside of the cement cap, concrete cap. This item is something that popped out when the cap was opened, and I have to tell you, the seasoned archaeologists on the crew were very excited about this. This was probably their prized find. It didn't excite me as much until I started to listen to them and learned more about what they were doing. But this is probably from the late 1800s. And so certainly within our era of the hotel time period, you can see there's writing on there, and there are a few other pieces that were picked up to go along with it. But it's the Turner Liquor Company, and it's Owl Grow whiskey, sorry, out of Cincinnati. I had a small brain freeze there, but it's Owl Grow whiskey out of out of Cincinnati. The Turner Liquor Company was actually a company that worked out of Cincinnati, Ohio, that was established in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they were attempting to take on the Canadian Club whiskey market. So they were doing all sorts of things. They actually started out making and branding what they called Windsor Club whiskey, which, as you can imagine, the Canadian Club company got very unhappy about. They claimed that it was being made and distilled in Windsor, Ontario, but it wasn't, and there's lots of problems. So essentially, the Canadian Club, the point of that is that the Canadian Club Whiskey Company sued the Windsor Club Whiskey Company, or the Turner Liquor folks, and after a court battle, Turner and Liquor said, forget it, we're out. And they sold their company to a gentleman named Edward Pattison, who continued the company under the same name, the Turner Liquor Company, but he released like a dozen different brands of whiskey within the next few years, including Owl Grove, which is what you see here. In this period of time was right in the late 1880s, early 1890s. And so kind of an intriguing piece, again, what you can piece together, and certainly the time period fits. Now, one of the big cautions that you have to have with these things is that just because something that's older is there doesn't mean it is from that time period. And so I'll show a couple of those. I think, it's certainly possible, but what you see here is a doll's leg, a porcelain doll leg, that was very popular from the 1850s to about the 1920s. It was referred to by the archaeologists as a frozen Charlotte doll, which some of you may have heard from. I think there's one in the Little House on the Prairie books and other stories as time goes on. But essentially, it's a small porcelain doll that was more mass produced and very common during the time period, but certainly could have found its way to that hotel or through the lunchroom and that sort of thing. And one of my personal favorites is the clay pipe. So what you see here are two different pieces of two different, more than likely pieces of two different pipes. This is a stem of one, and then the stem and bowl of another. So not one full intact pipe, but it is actually a fur trade era pipe. This got me very excited because, of course, we don't have a lot of fur trade era history, especially being, we have the lakes, but not so much the rivers and things that would have been utilized between here and or utilized, I guess, to get the skins and things, the furs off to where they needed to be. But what was interesting is, again, when talking with the archaeologists, they talked a lot about the fact that these types of things would have been kept. They would have been, they weren't disposable. They were something that would have been kept in families for decades and would have been not discarded quickly. And so they find them fairly often, but it was fun to have one. Again, it would have been very appropriate in an 1880s, 1890s hotel at the lakeshore. Would have made total sense. We did find a fair number, and I think Dan has a couple of them, or at least one there, of charred pieces of wood, which helped support the story of the fire. And again, I think I mentioned, or I know I mentioned earlier, pieces that were charred glass or burned glass, melted glass that were twisted and changed. We also found, this isn't a great photo of it, hard to make out what's in there, but this is actually the remnant of a cistern in the city street. It was actually on the Boatworks grounds, so would have been where the street had been, where Getty Avenue would have been previously, but this was a brick-filled cistern to collect water, and kind of an interesting piece. And then I will leave the official presentation with you with this particular item, which are these seasoned archaeologists are sort of I can't think of the right word. I won't say they're bitter, but they don't get too excited about much. This one was actually exciting to them. This is a carbide lantern rod, and I will let Dr. Rothus and Dan let me know if the video doesn't work properly, but I will let Dr. Rothus explain what this actually is on site from 2013.
Or if you're in the tractor or whatever, this goes into the lantern. There's a fluid, and I'm not quite sure what it is, that drips onto this rod. There's a chemical reaction with the rod that releases a flammable gas, and that creates the very, very bright light.
Wow.
Interesting.
All the way down the pole? Or just the tip?
I think it drips onto the tip, but
Okay.
but here's the thing: we find these in fields all the time, and we either find them. I've never found them with this attached.
Okay.
But we either find the whole rod, or we find half of it. We never find them like burned or anything like that. So.
Well, that makes more sense. We're talking about,
Yeah.
flame on top, and a couple people have said,
And it's specifically called a carbide
Lantern
rod.
With that said, there were some interesting things that they couldn't quite explain, frankly, and things that they thought were intriguing, if you will, out of the finds and pieces that were there. But I will stop the official portion of the presentation at that point, because I know we're getting tight on time for our 7 o'clock end time anyway. But are there any questions out there?